Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss the demand from businesses in Northern Ireland to extend the Brexit transition period until we're actually ready to leave the EU's mechanisms properly. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, whenever you look at any aspect of Brexit, of course, you see a mess. And then when you look at the same aspect of Brexit as it relates to Northern Ireland, you see an absolute catastrophe waiting to happen. Businesses in Northern Ireland have made it clear that nobody is ready for the checks at the start of 2021. And again, I'll have to remind people here because you get various extremes of optimism and pessimism in terms of whether we're going to get some sort of deal. The optimism at the moment is quite high for something. But this doesn't depend on whether we get a deal or not. Obviously, the situation is worse if we don't, but even in the event of a deal, these checks have to take place. Now, they've pointed out the information black hole, as they call it, as a result of the politicisation of Brexit talks, because this is a serious issue indeed that can't be understated, because in trying to keep promising the impossible, Boris Johnson and his government are deliberately keeping people ignorant about the realities of Brexit. So the issue with goods passing from Britain to Northern Ireland, of course, is all about what's considered to be at-risk goods. At risk in this case meaning at risk of passing into the Republic of Ireland and therefore the EU. So obviously, if two bordering countries have different customs arrangements, then you need controls when it comes to goods passing between them. Now, goods that might be fine in one territory may not meet the standards in another, for example. Then, of course, there's the issue of tariffs on top of that if they apply. But there are a lot of goods that pass from Britain to Northern Ireland without ever being transported to the Republic of Ireland. They're intended to go to the to Northern Ireland and stay there, be used there. So sometimes even come back. Sometimes raw materials go to Northern Ireland, are processed and come back to Britain. So there was supposed to be a system for designated goods as low risk and letting them off the cumbersome paperwork that would otherwise be involved. Now, the Brexit Select Committee have been told in the last week that transporting foods would be subject to health certificates. We've come across this before, for example. And Michael Gove was supposed to be working on removing the need for those. But the drug-addled Viper has spent so much time politicking and not enough time actually achieving anything. So this hasn't been done. It's not been done. And now there's a serious problem in actually getting food into Northern Ireland, as the businesses came up with one example, like a ham and cheese sandwich isn't going to cause a catastrophe. And yet, because we haven't put these things in place, transporting a ham and cheese sandwich from Britain to Northern Ireland comes with it a fair amount of onerous paperwork. Now, I've talked about this before, of course, serious issue for which we need a serious solution. And this is quite apart from the general problems for manufacturers wanting, for example, you might want to export something to Belfast, but you don't have a system in place that understands that it's not going to then head on to Dublin, for example, afterwards. Now, earlier this year, the government talked about a shock and awe campaign. And the idea of this was to get people up to speed. So it was supposed to begin like July. When it was too late to seek an extension, the idea is the government had to keep lying to people, had to keep promising the unicorns up to a certain point until it was too late to do anything about it. So you got to July, all of a sudden, unless you change the law, which I don't think Conservative MPs are going to allow Boris Johnson to do, but unless you change the law, ministers could no longer seek an extension or accept an extension to the transition period. So with Brexit all but assured, then the government needed to change tack, because if people carried on believing in the unicorns all the way up to and including and beyond Brexit, they wouldn't be properly prepared, and the chaos that will inevitably come as a part of Brexit will be amplified because people won't even be ready for it. So this plan was supposed to actually start to inform people about the horrors that would be unleashed in an effort to get people ready. That was my understanding. Because as bad as Brexit is, what will undoubtedly make it worse is if people don't prepare. But if people are being told that everything will be wonderful, what is there to prepare other than champagne flutes? Ironically, of course, such a situation, disproportionately impacts Brexit supporters, because those who do not support Brexit are much more likely to be reading about the problems with Brexit and not dismissing them and maybe take some action themselves. So, for example, Boris Johnson told businesses very famously that trade between Britain and Northern Ireland, there wouldn't be any paperwork. He even went as far as to say that if someone gives you a form to fill out, you send it to me and I'll put it in the bin. So he really needs businesses to be up to speed with that. He now needs to say, by the way, I was lying. You actually need to do things. And the thing is, I don't see any sign of this so-called shock and awe campaign anymore. It's the second half of November now, and the government are still not clean on what Brexit means. They're still downplaying the consequences, saying that this will be fine and this will be fine, denying things outright. And yet they still say that people and businesses need to familiarise themselves with the changes or they're in trouble. But every time someone tries to explain to the people or businesses what some of the changes are, the government keeps saying, no, that's not going to happen. No, don't be ridiculous. That's Project Fear still. Now imagine how confusing their coronavirus messages have been, for example. Go to work, don't go to work, very famously, and all that. This is exactly what they're doing with Brexit as well. They're saying you need to do this. Oh, but by the way, there's no need to do that because it's going to be fine. And it'll have much the same effect as well. Businesses who are clued up know it, and nowhere will it be more keenly felt than in Northern Ireland, of course. And clearly, businesses there have lost all faith in solutions being applied in the next 6 weeks. Either they don't believe that the government are going to do it, or they more specifically don't believe the government can now do it, not enough time. And so they feel that the only genuine way forward is an extension. Now, despite what some Brexiteers will try and say, an extension is not legally impossible. They say, it's legally impossible because it's set in law this date. Yeah, it is. And if it were applying to anyone else, that would be the law, and that's all there is to it. It is against the law at the moment for ministers to seek or accept an extension. But the thing is, the thing about parliaments, you can't really hold parliaments to laws, because if they don't like a law, they're legislative bodies, they just change it. That's what parliaments do, in fact. They make laws, they repeal laws, they change laws. And so they could change this one very easily. It would take no time at all. All Westminster and the EU Parliament, because it's also EU law, all they'd need to do is amend a little bit of that legislation and it's all fine. A couple of lines. Now, the EU Parliament would, I gather, be more than fine with that. We were already offered a 2-year extension to see us through the other side of COVID and then pick it up then. Politically, more difficult for Boris Johnson. Now, he made such a fuss that it's hard now to see how he could do it. He could physically get the law changed. It's not. So if Boris Johnson just woke up tomorrow and said, actually, yeah, we need to, if he decided that politically the best thing for him or the least bad thing for him was to seek an extension, he could absolutely seek an extension. He could get the EU Parliament to do that. He could get Westminster to do it, because opposition parties would do this. There'd be enough Conservative MPs who would do as they're told on this, even agree with it. But the tricky thing is that there are also a fair number of Conservative MPs, 100 at least, who would not be happy with this and would threaten and mean the threats to cause a damaging split in the Conservative Party. So Boris Johnson wouldn't risk it. Although he could get it through, he'd have the votes to get it through, the votes won't come from the right places, so he won't do it. And it should also be borne in mind that, unless I've missed something, the EU are no longer talking about the prospect of an extension. They did try saying this. They haven't said this for a few months now. They haven't tried to say, by the way, we could still extend. And that's not because they're not in favour, but because they know it won't happen as well. They understand that politically it's not going to happen. Impossible for Johnson, realistically, to simply extend. The best we could probably hope for in terms of an extension is agreeing some sort of deal, which, at the moment looks likely. In a few days' time, I may say something that makes it sound much less likely. But at the moment, there's a bit of optimism for something. May not be much, but something. And of course, if we agree a deal, then that allows him potentially to seek some sort of implementation period, which would be an effective extension, but by a different name. It wouldn't be called an extension period. It would be called an implementation period. It would just be exactly the same. He could probably sell that to some Brexiteers. Whether he could sell it to the ones in his own party, the hardcore ones, I don't know. Whether we would see that. I would be doubtful, but you never know. It's not politically impossible as far as I can tell. But just finally, it is also worth bearing in mind just the fact that these Northern Irish businesses are calling for an extension. They probably also know it's politically not possible, but it also shows you just how serious the situation is. If they understand that it's politically impossible for Boris Johnson to do this, why ask for the impossible unless all the actual possible solutions have been exhausted? This is potentially their way of saying there is now nothing that can be done to deal with this other than a complete rethink on the political mindset. They warned the government didn't listen. Now it's too late. That's what they're saying. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.